Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your early warning briefing for Wednesday, the 9th of October, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. And just as a reminder, everyone, if you haven't already, let's go ahead and we'll get checked in, and I'll try to do a little bit more over on the HIM Radio Hub, especially if you're in Florida. And let's try to get everyone linked up over on the Florida page. I'll be able to check in as well. And with that, let's bring on Robert for a couple of items today. We've got a quick hurricane update, but really, Robert, I want to zoom in on this Afghan national, this guy that's here on a special immigrant visa. He is, I believe, was an Afghan refugee. He was arrested recently for plotting a terror attack on election day. What's going on?
Yeah, so this Afghan national that's here on a special immigrant visa, his name's Nasir Ahmed Tawhedi, and he apparently was planning to conduct an election day terrorist attack on behalf of ISIS, according to the DOJ. And I think we reported on a couple weeks ago in late September that Rep. Clay Higgins, the Republican from Louisiana, said that he had sources telling him that over 2,000 of what's called special interest aliens have crossed the border, and these are people he says are on the FBI terror watch list. And I think this illustrates that it's likely that other foreigners, either with terrorist group ties or sympathies that are not on this terror watch list, have also crossed, or in this case, been admitted through these special immigration parole programs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, he's being accused of plotting an ISIS terror attack. Do you know if this is ISIS Khorasan? I mean, or any kind of links back to Afghanistan? I mean, are there any other details?
So in the indictment, they just said ISIS. They didn't say if it was the Khorasan group or not. Okay. And then they also said that this was very recent. He was only arrested Monday when he tried to purchase some weapons from a confidential human informant. They said they did find communications on his phone, and then they also are looking through his computers right now to see any other communications with ISIS-related individuals.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that we've repeatedly talked about is the increased risk when you have international communications, when you've got any kind of electronic communications, those can be intercepted during the fact there's all this metadata. It can be investigated after the call or after the email or after the communication. And so hopefully if this guy is linked up with anyone else here in the United States, hopefully they will go arrest them very quickly. But it kind of ties back into the point. Mid-2000s, Al-Qaeda says, hey, it's really risky. NSA is trying to listen to everything. And so we can't have these international communications and coordination. So instead, let's just produce magazines. Let's radicalize people who are already over there, who can plan these attacks on their own without any kind of foreign or international oversight or coordination. And so listen, what's happening right now, or I guess probably what has been happening, is FBI, you know, they're looking for those other phone numbers. They're looking for names, addresses. I'm sure they're scrubbing if this guy has laptops or whatever. They're just looking for additional clues to track down. Let's also, Robert, get an update on this hurricane. I guess it's hitting tonight, early tomorrow morning, officially making landfall, that is.
Yeah, that's what the National Hurricane Center says. Right now, it's gone back up to a Category 5, and they're saying 165-mile-per-hour winds. Evacuations are ongoing, as far as I've seen, and then I think United Airlines said that they are now full up on flights out of all 4 airports that are in the path. And I think all other flights out of Tampa from other airlines have been canceled.
Mm-hmm. All right. There's been a lot of contract negotiations breaking down. This next thing is about Boeing. I guess maybe we will be seeing a strike at the Boeing plant. I don't know. Up in the air. We'll bring Mark on. Boeing withdrew its contract offer in this ongoing contract dispute with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. And what's going on, Mark?
Hey, how you doing? Yes, so the strikes with Boeing have been continuing. There was hopes that they would soon be able to come to some kind of negotiation. Those have reportedly broken down. This is a major problem because Boeing has been taking on massive debts, been struggling a lot since some of their mechanical failures in the past. And so this is kind of a perfect storm for Boeing.
Mm-hmm. And then is this expected to impact, Taiwan and all these other countries? They're trying to buy all these U.S. weapons and aircraft platforms. Is this going to have any impact to arming U.S. allies?
I think so. I think that's kind of more of a downstream effect, but definitely this problem, especially with the debts building from the strikes and the possibility of Boeing's bonds being downgraded to a junk status. All this does is it makes it harder and harder for Boeing to recover. And so this will imperil future contracts and other kinds of actions like that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, what's that they say? Go get woke, go broke. Many such cases. All right. Thanks for that, Mark. We'll bring you back on, talk about the global sit rep here in just a second. All right. We'll pitch you back to Robert because we've been talking a lot about these power shortages to the point where the federal authorities are telling these AI data centers, you cannot build your data center because you're going to build it and there's not going to be enough electricity for you. We just saw recently the Biden administration is kind of pivoting here, and they're apparently getting serious about expanding nuclear power in the United States. What's going on?
So this comes from White House climate advisor Ali Zaidi, and he said earlier this week that the White House is looking at restarting nuclear power plants across the country. Right now, there's only 2 that are actually have any kind of progress on them. That's 3 Mile Island Unit 1 that we've already talked about, and then the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan, which has also gotten, I think, $1.5 billion from the Department of Energy. Right now, the timeline of both of those is in the years. I think Palisades is saying 2 years minimum, and 3 Mile Island's going to restart in 2028. So I think that the timeline for the restart of these old power plants, and especially new power plants, is going to be too long to avoid shortages that we think are going to begin next year. And this is, I think, not going to meet necessarily the power needs. Each of these nuclear plants is 1 gigawatt or less, and when we talked about Bank of America's global research report last week, they're saying 300 gigawatts possibly needed across the U.S. for new demand. I think that this 2 and 3 year timeline, though, could be extended because they're probably going to run into regulatory hurdles and delays like other nuclear plants have recently.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying too. There are a lot of people who are very smart saying we're on the verge of an energy renaissance. The marginal cost of power is going to zero, and we're going to start building nuclear plants. So we're going to have these little backyard mini nukes, and for a nuclear power plant before a neighborhood. And I'm just not seeing it. I'm glad you bring these dates up. 2025 at the earliest for one. 2028. These power shortages are starting. We're already having technically power shortages now, because they're telling these AI data centers they can't build because there's no electricity for them. And so 3 Mile Island Unit 1 expected to restart in 2028. So that's 3+ years from now, if everything goes as planned. So I'm glad you bring that up, Robert. All right, let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway, and I'll just give it to you. Go ahead.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack said that Congress is running out of time to pass a $1.5 trillion farm bill. And if they don't get it passed when they come back from recess before December, it's probably not going to move in the new Congress just because of priorities from a new administration. And I think when we talked about this before, a lot of this money is going towards farmers that are having historically low farm incomes this year. And advocates are saying that this could drive some farmers out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And then something I saw interesting in Virginia, in a Virginia House race, there's an independent candidate named Bentley Hensel who's running for the 8th District in Virginia. The incumbent, Don Beyer, said he would not participate in any more debates. So Hensel has created an artificial intelligence chatbot to stand in for a public debate. So I'm going to try to find, I think this debate is scheduled for October 22nd. So I'm going to try to find and watch this debate. But I think this is interesting because we might see other, in some of these down ballot races, see other candidates, independent candidates, start to do something like this when they're blocked out by the bigger party candidates for debates.
Mm-hmm.
And then
just one quick point on this. It's been science fiction for so long, but now with Neuralink, and Elon Musk is talking about essentially maybe not all humans, but humans that who want to get ahead are going to have some, internet connected chip in their brain. It's just going to be incredibly interesting to see a debate, a speech, or whatever, when you have a human brain, let's say a politician, and then you have this very crisp, clean, on point AI system feeding them the things to say. I think it's very interesting. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And then a group of bipartisan lawmakers from the House that are led by Kathy McMorris Rogers, Washington Republican, and Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey, are wanting a briefing from the FDA on the presence of counterfeit Ozempic and semaglutide products in the U.S. medical supply chain. And this originates from, they said they got comments from other of these weight loss drug makers saying that they're seeing the sales of counterfeit products. I also saw the UK has had a major increase in counterfeit semaglutide products. So why I think this is important is because they bring up a point where this raises questions about the security of the U.S. medical supply chains in other areas. So I'm going to keep an eye out for this briefing and see what other potential security issues they bring up. Mm-hmm. And then the Information Energy Agency said that U.S. crude oil production is going to be revised down this year. They initially forecasted at 3.2%, and they're saying now it's going to be 2.4% this year. And I think this is the beginning of the impact from some of these Biden policies we've talked about over the last year, where the Biden administration has started restricting oil drilling leases on federal land. And then also for the first time since 1920, increased royalties on oil drilling on federal land. So I think this is going to start cutting into that bump in record oil production we saw stemming from the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. All right. So this is production growth is decreasing. So we're still growing. We're still producing more oil, but just a little bit less. All right, this year and then into next year. All right, and then finally, let's end on this note about the Electoral College. Democrats have been attacking the Electoral College. They've wanted a popular vote candidate. They wanted the presidential candidate who won the popular vote to win the election, and they do this because they have a majority of votes here. What did Tim Walz say?
So at a fundraiser yesterday in Sacramento, California, he said that the Electoral College needs to go. He also said that, well, this is not likely to happen in the current political environment, but I think this is, like you said, an indicator of where Democrats are just trending over the last couple of years. And he's obviously potentially headed towards the White House. He's also one of the 17 governors that have signed that national popular vote referendum. So I think he's serious about this, and this is, I think, an indicator of where Democrats are heading. There's also other issues like free speech and stuff that they're headed towards a much more restrictive measure, and I think designed to cut off political dissidents. And then this is designed to give Democrats effectively a lock on the White House.
Mm-hmm. It would be if there was no Electoral College, there would be one party rule at the White House for sure. Also, I just want to point out that is a direct quote. He said, quote, "The Electoral College needs to go." All right, saying this yesterday. All right, a little bit of good news for Republicans here. You say the GOP is gaining ground in a Wisconsin Senate race, and are we still expecting the Republicans to take the Senate? Is it up in the air? What are your expectations?
I think GOP is still in position to flip the Senate next year. This Wisconsin race is interesting because it went from lean Democrat to toss-up, and I also saw that there was some internal polling from this is Tammy Baldwin's Senate seat, from her campaign showing that she was up 2 and Harris is down 3 in Wisconsin. So it looks like Harris might be having a drag on the down ballot races, which would explain why she hasn't been going around stumping for some of these races like the Trump campaign has. There's also been some moves on some House races. Virginia's 7th District and New Jersey's 7th District have also moved towards the Republican challenger or the Republican incumbent, depending on the seat. And there's also some move on Ted Cruz's Texas seat that's gone from likely to lean Republican. However, I do want to say that I think a lot of this is coming from Allred. Colin Allred is the Democratic challenger. His fundraising advantage. He apparently has raised almost twice, like $20 million more than Cruz. However, Cruz has beaten 2 Democrats, in 2018 and 2012, who out fundraised him significantly. And Allred and Cruz are around the same polling margin as the previous races. So I don't think that this is necessarily, catastrophic news for Cruz. I think he's likely to win. So this gives the Republicans potentially another seat in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm in Central Texas, so I see that these Texas Senate ads. A lot of Colin Allred. Colin Allred is, compared to your AOC and your Debbie Wasserman Schultz, he's a fairly moderate. If you watch his ads, he looks like a border hawk. I don't even think that he mentions he's a Democrat, and he's surrounded. One of the main ads that I've seen, I don't know, 100 times, is he's surrounded by people in law enforcement in uniform, which is odd to me. You can't do this in the military, but apparently, if you're in law enforcement, you can show up in your police outfit and do a campaign ad for this guy. At any rate, he looks like a conservative Democrat. That's all I'm saying. So this is not a case where some far left progressive is challenging Ted Cruz in this Senate seat. And Mark, let's bring you back on and jump into the global sit rep. We'll start here at the top. You say some Arab states apparently are fearing a second Arab Spring. What's going on?
Yeah, there's growing fears of a second Arab Spring. Arab officials have been confiding in U.S. officials and even filtering through the Israeli government that a lot of these Arab states are afraid that there could be kind of a combustible situation where economic grievances start to mingle with some of these street protests and the anger over the Gaza war. And so this is a significant worry for these Arab leaders and could really hamper peace negotiations in the region.
And then moving on to Tehran, this back and forth between an Israeli response and what Iran's going to do. I saw where Iran's continuing to warn Israel not to strike nuclear facilities, not to strike oil facilities. We have seen some indications that maybe the Israelis are looking at oil and economic infrastructure. So what's the latest here with Tehran?
Yeah, so there's going to be an upcoming phone call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And so Iran has been increasingly concerned that some of the Gulf states, these are Arab countries, that they would allow U.S. or Israeli forces to use their airspace or use military bases. And so essentially Iran has just submitted this warning to their Arab neighbors that if there is any kind of collaboration with Israel or the United States in striking Iran, that they will consider that, an act of war, not just, if it's one member of these Gulf states, it's kind of considered to be all of them are implicated. And so this was just a very strident warning to these Arab states that this kind of a thing will not be tolerated from Iran.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, you look at these Sunni states who look at Iran as a pariah. They're not pro-Iran. Maybe it's up in the air whether how friendly they actually are or want to be with Israel. But I'm just, if you're Saudi Arabia, you're maybe a more moderate, comparatively moderate Sunni country. At what point do you maybe support Israel, maybe support the United States in allowing your airspace or whatever assets to be used to attack Iran here? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. And, this kind of goes back into the fears of a second Arab Spring. Is what we're seeing here is we're seeing the balance of power between Arab states and between Persia, right? So this is Iran. So this kind of balance of power has been in question the entire time. And so much of our actions in the Middle East has been an effort to either rebalance or reset that power dynamic between the two. And so there's really not a love lost between Tehran and between its Arab neighbors. But then there's also those fears of the local unrest. And so a lot of these Arab populations, where they don't really consider maybe the balance of power going on in the region, they're definitely tuned into the Gaza war. And so these Arab leaders are between a rock and a hard place. They're really having to try to make sure to check Iran's power in the region while also trying to contain the domestic unrest. And this could prevent them from being able to rebalance those priorities and to be able to engage in transnational peace talks.
Mm-hmm. It's a mess. Let's get in even deeper, Mark. It's such a mess over there. All right, let's move on to Ukraine. One of the things I've seen apparently from senior Ukrainian officials is they expect some ceasefire talks, so they expect some movement on some sort of peace talks or ceasefire agreement with Russia after the election, especially if Trump wins here. And I think even maybe Zelensky has said something to that effect. But it really does look like this conflict between Ukraine and Russia could draw on for years. maybe indefinitely at a very low scale. But I have seen some movement. People are now starting to talk about Ukraine needs to give up some land to Russia in order to end the war. So what's the latest going on over there?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is really interesting because prior to the election, as you mentioned, there's a lot of bargaining chips, and then there's a lot of telegraphing. And so Ukraine is having to try to balance out there has to be some kind of end to this conflict. There has to be an end game. But if they signal too much of what that end game is, that will compromise their negotiations. The interesting piece here is that Ukrainian officials are privately expressing growing interest in having some kind of negotiation, possibly land compromises, dealing with Russia. But they're prevented from doing this publicly because that could really hamper the negotiations with Russia. And so all of this is really contingent on the election. It's contingent on who's willing to go to the table and how much they can be able to let go when the time comes. The most difficult piece is going to be that NATO membership. It's very unlikely that they'll be able to join NATO, but they don't want Russia to know that. And so it just kind of puts everything into a state of flux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm extremely doubtful about Ukraine joining NATO anytime soon. Also, there's a little bit of a mismatch, I think, in expectation here, because you look at some of the NATO guys, the pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine cheerleaders, essentially, and they talk about these Ukrainian strikes into Russia as a signal that Ukraine is going to topple Russia or cause big problems for Russia. I look at it as posturing. This is just a bargaining chip. Ukraine says, hey, we'll stop these attacks into Russia as a part of these negotiations. It's just another thing. All right. And then let's move on here briefly. U.S. State Department is going to address some concerns of Asian leaders over the South China Sea. What's going on?
Yeah, this also relates to the election. So right now, this is going to be one of the last opportunities the Biden administration has to really put forth their regional strategy for South China Sea, for Asia. And so they're going to be meeting with Asian leaders in Laos, and they're going to be directly addressing some of these attacks on local fishing vessels. I think there's a recent attack in Vietnam, for example, where China is really trying to flex its power in the region. And so the United States is going to be meeting there with local leaders, talking about local issues, but also addressing that growing pressure from China.
Mm-hmm. All right, and finally, this is probably one of the most concerning things I've seen coming out of North Korea. Apparently, they're fortifying their side of the border. I guess this is in response to South Korea getting a lot cozier with NATO and this concept of global NATO or Asian NATO. So what's going on?
Yeah, this is we haven't really seen this for a while, and so North Korea has essentially cut all of those traffic ways. They've also started to fortify their border. We're talking fencing, barriers, landmines as well, and this all comes on the heels of Kim Jong-un, saying that Putin was his dear comrade, and then also reports of North Korean soldiers being deployed to Ukraine. And so we're seeing this a combustible situation. This allegedly is in response to South Korea military exercises, and then also some deploying of U.S. nuclear strategic assets to the region. But this is a significant escalation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did see where Kim Jong-un was very critical about South Korea's growing friendship with NATO countries. All right.